Bob Pink, do you want to introduce yourself?
Am I off mute?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. John, I'm here as a John Q. citizen. I live in Fairhaven. I share what I believe is a broader concern about climate resiliency on the municipal level. But I'm here unofficially because I'm just exploring this through my work as a committee member on the Marine Resources Commission. So, and I met you, John, at the Rising Seas and Coastal Impacts event, and that followed me here to the Westport Resilience Committee, and I love the model of it. So I'm just going to be an observer, and thanks for the opportunity to kind of watch what you're all doing.
Well, thanks, Bob, very much for attending. We're glad you're here.
Yeah, well, I may reach back out because I do believe that, you know, community by community is important, but, you know, this is a regional issue, and, you know, we get individual communities to work together, we have more strength. So
that's great. Thanks for joining us. And if people have questions as we go along, hit the raise hand, and I will try and keep my eye out. So we have circulated an agenda. Amy, thank you for that. The first item is minutes. I read through them and found one typo, which I sent to Amy. But I do want to, because the last meeting was really complicated. There a lot of votes, a lot of discussion. And so I want to do a couple of thank yous. One, I want to thank everyone at the meeting because there were a lot of complicated votes. There was a lot of discussion. The discussion was really civilized. Everyone was very respectful of everyone else's points of view. And so I want to thank everyone. You know, that meeting could have gone on for 4 days, and instead it went on for about an hour and a half. And I want to thank everyone for that constructive meeting. And Amy, are we recording, by the way, Amy?
Yes, we are.
Okay. And so we record so that Amy can do the minutes. Amy reduced all of that meeting into those minutes, and it was from all those votes we took that were captured in the minutes and the planning board that Michael and I were able to send a report to the select board about recommendations for East Beach. That was kind of the point of everything. And I hope you all found that was an accurate reflection of the deliberations of that meeting we had a couple of months ago. But Amy, thank you so much for capturing a really complex meeting. If people have found any errors or omissions, please let us know now. Otherwise, I'd appreciate a motion to approve the minutes.
I move to approve the minutes.
Thanks, Phil. Is there a second?
I second.
Thanks, Mike. Seconded by Mike Yagman. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, thanks. The minutes are approved. Michael, do you want to give a quick report?
I think we can pass over to Michael Yogman.
Okay, all right, let's pass that over. What we're going to do tonight is we have had a presentation of, you know, our idea is to give a report to the select board and to give a report to the people of Westport. Probably report to the people before we report to the select board so we can get some feedback. And before doing that, we want to give kind of a first draft of each committee's thinking. We have done Mike Sullivan, who can't be with us tonight, the water subcommittee first draft. I did a first draft of a preface. Tonight, we are going to get the first draft reports from health. I'm going to take this out of order because Mike Yagman's got to leave, and agriculture. And Joseph Inglesby has sent out that report, so you've all had an opportunity to look at it. And then at our July meeting, Bob Dailers, who chairs the infrastructure committee, says that he will be ready with the first draft of infrastructure and public safety. And Wendy Nicholas, who chairs the historic structures, says that she might be ready with that chapter. If she is, and we present those at the July meeting, then we will have looked at the first draft of all of the substance reports. And then we can dump them in Jeff's lap of public engagement and say, Jeff, we have 5 chapters that are all written differently, organized differently, different kind of tone. Any ideas with you and the planning department staff, how we start to make this look like it's a report from one committee that uses the same statistics, the same organizational framework, the same tone, all of that kind of stuff. So when citizens read it, it looks like it comes from one committee. And so, but the big work will have been done. That is a complete first draft. And we can start to think about how this looks like a one committee report that we might take for feedback to the community. So that's the way I'm thinking about how this progresses step by step. Now, I don't want to eat into the time of the health committee. So Phil, are you going to walk us through the slides?
Yes. And just to say, hopefully this will work. I think this is my first time of ever presenting slides remotely, but I've had some advice from Amy, so we'll give it a shot.
Okay, you're on.
Okay. All right. Yeah, so here's the front page. So
Not
Wait,
yet.
wait.
Not yet,
We-
I don't
Phil.
see it.
We got to
Phil.
make sure
Okay.
everyone can see it.
Okay. Is it up?
Not yet.
No. Did you hit the present now button at the bottom of your screen?
I did. I think I did. So that was the, so let me exit from here. Okay. So, and go back to here. No.
So it should ask you select a tab to share after you hit share screen, and then just click on the PowerPoint presentation tab.
That's what I thought I did.
Okay.
And now I'm talking to you, but I don't see the icon for the Google. Oh, there you are. Okay. All right. Oh, do I want? Oh, so it's asking me questions. Invitation. Okay. What do I want to share? Select a tab to share. Is that what I should be doing?
Yeah, your PowerPoint presentation should.
Okay, so let me
be
start
there.
back here. Okay, so so what I did is I went to, my taskbar and I hit the PowerPoint presentation link and my PowerPoint came up, but it's not showing to you. So does it have to do with?
Let me see if I can find your PowerPoint presentation, and then I can just do it from my computer.
Okay.
All right, let's see. Do you guys all see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so, okay, so, so go to the next slide.
Okay. Okay, so, yep. Just tell me when to switch slides and I'll do that for you.
Okay. Or should I do it? I mean, but yeah, go to the next slide, Amy, please.
Are we on slide 3 now?
Mine hasn't changed. It still has the cover, you know, the cover page.
Really?
Yeah.
Is everyone else seeing slide 3?
Not yet,
No.
Amy.
Really? Okay.
Did you download it and try to?
It's open in the browser. It looks like it's in the browser and not in the PowerPoint. There you go.
Better?
Yeah, but now you're not.
Yeah, but now you are at page 3, I think.
You're on page
Okay.
3, but not in presentation mode.
So we need to go back at least one page.
Okay.
Perfect.
So
Okay.
let me just go back. Here you go.
Okay, so the report starts off by focusing on what the scope of the health risk analysis is, because health risks are or adverse health impacts are gonna cross almost every type of potential, climate situation. And so the health report really focuses on the physical and mental health aspects of extreme heat events. And I've essentially deferred what I've characterized as collateral health impacts to the other reports. So the water committee, in terms of storm surge and flood and infrastructure and agriculture, I think we'll probably all talk about the disruption that will result within their topic areas to individuals. And so that's how this report is focused. And the second part of the introduction, it has to do with identifying the data sources. It was actually the biggest change between my original draft report, because it really reflects the conclusions of the state's 2022 climate assessment report and 2023 Resilient Massachusetts plan, which I recommend. I mean, both are very big, but for reasons that I'll go into in a minute, I recommend if if you haven't looked at them, they're definitely worth taking a look at. And then I also incorporated a lot of, what was available of demographic data and health data from the Health and Human Services Department. Next slide, please. So the focus is on rising heat projections. It kind of shows where we were 10 years ago and what's projected statewide of an average temperature of 94 going up to 97 by 2070. But what is important about the state plans is that they regionalize temperature as well as precipitation impacts. And so so we are in the Cape Islands and South Coast region. And so the data that I'm going to show it reflects the analysis that was done that, brings down impacts to not Westport level, but at least a coastal community level. And so that's the link to, to the overview of the top impacts in our region. And I linked the other one there to the dashboard, which in which you can call up, Westport, and it will show you on the dashboard through each of the next 4 decades what the increase in temperature and precipitation will be in the area. So next slide. So here what it looks like along what our maximum temperature, the days above 90, the days above 95, and the days above 100 over the next 4 decades. And you can draw your own conclusions from it. You know, my own conclusion was, you know, that there's going to be some fairly incremental increases, you know, over the into the next decade, and then things, you know, start to increase. But still, if you looked at the days above 95, those numbers are probably smaller than I anticipated when I started looking into this. Next slide. So the second piece of the work was looking at a piece that I think all of us have done, which is how do you do risk priority assessment? So what are the most significant things, and list them in some time of order that you want to address. And how the state did this is they looked at the level of consequence, you know, there's how big an impact is going to have, the disproportionality of the impact, particularly focusing on environmental justice areas, and then what they call the adaptation gap, which is, well, looking at the current situation, how far do we have to go in order to achieve the resilience level that we want to achieve in order to protect the interests, you know, that are being threatened by the risk. And so when I initially wrote the report, I assumed it was going to be the physical impact on us, you know, that extreme heat was going to affect us and will affect us, but that was going to be the primary impact. And that was, at the statewide level, the conclusion that extreme heat and its impact on health and cognitive conditions was going to be the top priority. But for our region, it's vector-borne diseases and bacterial contamination. And one of the reasons for that, and this, you know, relates back to the regionalization impact analysis, is that the coastline is 25 to 30% fewer extreme heat heat events than inland areas. And part of that is because there's the insignificant heat island effect, which I think most people are familiar with, but as it sounds, you know, where you have, you know, lots of roadways, lots of buildings, a lack of shade from trees. And so in cities like that, you're going to have very high levels of heat. And when you put that into the average, you're going to get, you know, statewide numbers that are going to show that that should be the highest priority. And we also benefit from the fact, and I think this is reflected in detail in Joseph's report, of how high a percentage of Westport land is surface water, forest, recreational, agricultural. And so we're at the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of urban heat island effect. And so we take a large advantage of that. But then our open spaces also increase certain vectors. I mean, I don't think tick exposure is a big problem, you know, in Boston and other major cities. And it is the primary threat that the state views that Westport and South Coast communities will, you know, be facing going forward. So let's go to the next slide. So here's some data that we have about Lyme disease. There's 460 cases currently, and you can see how quickly those numbers jump up. I have to say they don't really explain analytically how they come to that number, but that's what we're looking at if if the conditions continue to increase in terms of health, in terms of heat. One thing not in the report, but which is in the news, is that that there's a vaccine that's being developed, and it's at the human trial phase right now, or and so maybe that is an off ramp to this problem. But we've seen in this area incidents of triple E and West Nile virus, West Nile, I should read, instead of West Nile virus. And so, again, those are things that from a physical health impact, we're going to need to be dealing with. This bacterial infection in shellfish and drinking water is very deadly when it occurs. I don't think we've had any of that here, but it's something that is noted in the reports. Next. Okay, so let's talk about the physiological impact of extreme heat events. Michael can certainly weigh in on that from a medical perspective than I can, but I think, so when it gets too hot, it triggers stroke, exhaustion. Also, if you have certain chronic illnesses, it'll also exacerbate that, causing internal organ damage, cardiovascular, and respiratory problems. And then, as Michael pointed out to me, there's also adverse side effects from medications, and many of them are over-the-counter medications that are heat sensitive and cause your body reacts in a way to the medication that interferes with its ability to manage heat. And so from the report, here's the increase in additional premature deaths related to extreme heat events. Next
Phil,
slide.
the people that are most at risk are the elderly, and particularly because of the temperature differential in Northwestport with more blacktop, and infants and young children. So there's some differential vulnerability here. The other thing I would point out about tick-borne diseases is we're not only talking about deer ticks, but Anaplasma, Borrelia. There are a host of other tick-borne diseases that we won't have vaccines for, at least in the imminent future.
I had one of those. Next slide. Yeah, so as Michael pointed out, the criteria, it's particularly sensitive to vulnerable populations. Here's a list of the criteria, some of which Michael mentioned: pregnancy, outdoor work, and inadequate income to afford air conditioners. Can also be a factor. So 25% of our population is 65 years or older. 7% live alone, and compared to the state average, we have a substantial disproportionate number of men have been hospitalized for heart attacks in Westport as compared to the statewide average, which would also make them more vulnerable. Okay. Real life experiences that of a link between extreme heat and suicide, and some of those factors it gets hot and people start drinking more alcohol to quench their thirst, but it also has, mental health impacts. And then, a kind of more deeper analysis showing that extreme heat triggers neurological and physiological changes, which are linked to impulsivity and aggression. And then I think, generally, it's been reported, and Michael again has been talking about this at the school level, of this rise of eco-anxiety among middle and high school students. And again, Mike, if you want to say anything about this, please do.
Well, just that some of it stems from their feeling that people aren't providing kind of positive interventions. And so I think the more we can encourage them to be active participants in solving problems, that can help.
So next slide. So the third level of risk that was discussed was it's the impact on excess heat on air quality, and it has kind of multiple impacts. It increases ground level contaminants. Then the extreme heat, which I think we got a little bit of, but the Northeast experience from wildfires in Canada, which have just again started off on the West Coast and are predicted for our area wildfires to increase in frequency, and then and also where you get stagnant air, you also get increased pollutant exposure. The chart reflects increases in pediatric asthma cases and the number of premature deaths. Okay, moving on. Okay, so now shifting gears. This is a section about what are we doing now about extreme heat. And there are three things that we already have in place. And this is actually a topic which I think that all of the committee reports should reflect, which is, what are we doing now? And the three things that we're doing now around heat is the Council on Aging operates a cooling center and also participates in a grant program for air conditioner distribution for individuals that cannot afford an air conditioner. There is the Are You OK program, where the police call in to what I've called a curated list. I think this is probably also done through the Council on Aging, to check in on folks who have conditions, where they need to make sure that they're functioning okay. And then, of course, there's our Department Emergency Response Program, and they certainly have been responding in increasing frequency to heat-related calls for medical attention. All right, next slide. I think this is the last slide. So these are my near-term planning recommendations. One is, more coordination around, among, town offices and departments, and particularly around emergency response plan. I don't believe, I understood that there was a possibility that we would be getting funding to update our emergency response plan, but I don't believe the one that exists now has, kind of climate change related and particularly heat related emergency response planning. Second, under the category of outreach, education, and intervention, I think our committee, the Board of Health, the Council on Aging, and schools and libraries, just by way of examples, can do a lot to make people aware of how they should be conducting themselves in extreme heat situations. The example that we were talking about the kind of medications that people should be aware of. So all that stuff. Data collection. I would just kind of personally be interested to see if we could even localize our heat exposure more by starting now to set up thermometers that would record heat in various parts of town to see whether or not there are kind of hotspots that we should focus on, and maybe trying to also get a better handle of what is the number of heat-related exposures and incidents that require medical attention. And the last part is looking at expanding our infrastructure. One of the things in my conversation with the Council on Aging director was that some people just don't want to, are not able, don't have transportation to come to the Council on Aging when the heat is extreme. And so being able to locate centers more close to neighborhoods, which we have determined have a higher potential for extreme heat exposure, could be something that could be looked into. Also, to expand air conditioning distribution in situations where it makes sense, to do that because a cooling center is not available, for example. And that's the end of the report.
So, Phil and Mike, thank you very much for that summary, which is really excellent. And I have some comments of my own, but I see a couple of hands up already. Dave, you're up first.
John, can I make a couple of
Oh,
comments?
yeah, go ahead,
Jump
Mike.
off? Phil, it's a wonderful report. And I just want to point out for people that don't have access to air conditioning, I learned the other day that using a fan with ice next to the fan can be a low-cost substitute. But for when we identify hotspots, things like creating tree canopies, putting reflections on roofs, and there are some ways of painting blacktop with white paint that reflects heat. So there are, more significant adaptations. Well, it's wonderful, and sorry to have to jump off, but thank you for wonderful report, Phil.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Phil. Dave, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, John, and thank you, Phil, for your thoughtful report. You started out with some tables of temperature rise, and I appreciate that they came from a website, and this should be no surprise coming from me. I'd love to know what RCP you were using in order to forecast those temperatures coming up, because it matters. And you may recall from the presentation that I gave on RCP that RCP 9 was incredibly unlikely. So in that context, can you share, what RCP was used for those projections?
Yes, I can. And so it's RCP 8.5. And I would, I didn't want to, what's the right metaphor? Kick the hornet's nest again on that. But if you go to the dashboard has a box that explains how the temperature projections were connected to the RCP 8.5. And it can lead you into a vast store of information about how the experts that were involved, picked that pick that standard. And so this is the state standard, which has been adopted, by the Secretary's office for heat.
Right, appreciate that. As you may recall, my recommendation was that we as an organization pick a much lower RCP because, of course, there are many experts who are of a different opinion. And even if the report that you've given uses the higher RCP, at least I think that we should acknowledge that not all experts agree on RCP 8.5.
Okay.
Can I just say
don't want to
one
have
thing?
this
Sorry.
discussion at every single meeting, but
Right.
I do think when we combine all of these reports, one of the things we have to do before we publish it is to make sure we are consistent. I think we had, I'll have to go back through the minutes, but I think we had decided to adopt the state decision-making on this, but let's move on for now. Jake, you're next.
I just want to point out, Phil, that was quite an extensive report and actually touched on a lot of issues that, I didn't actually think about. I think the tick-borne diseases, as much as that was a little bit of a smaller segment, this is more of a comment. I think it's pretty prevalent in Westport, and I think it's to a point that people aren't even aware of it to the point. But I think with the climate change and milder winters, you're going to have less of the tick population being killed off, and you're going to have the Lyme. I probably know 5 or 6 individuals, very close individuals, that have been battling Lyme or other tick-borne viruses. So I didn't think about it in that context, but I appreciate you pointing that out. Thank you.
Thanks. Jeff, you're next.
Thanks, Phil. Great summary. As you know, I've read your draft of the report and given you some comments. A few things popped into my head as you were presenting, and I appreciate the fact that you kind of defined the scope for your report and deferred to the other subcommittees on other health-related impacts. I just wanted to ask if you've checked with those subcommittee authors or leads on some of the impacts that may be health related, but may not have hit their radar yet. And I'm just thinking about, as people respond to extreme storm events, they may go, out to check on a boat and be exposed to, injury or drowning risks through that activity, or they may be clearing trees, using power tools they're not familiar with, or exposed to falling limbs and branches. Those are also health effects associated with climatic change that may or may not be addressed in those other reports. So I just wanted to put those on somebody's radar. The other thing was, what about vegetation changes with climate change and increasing prevalence of, exposure to noxious plants, poison ivy, etc.? Has that come up?
Well, it wasn't mentioned in the state reports, as a priority. And what, so they identified, say, their top 3 or 4 highest risks, and then there was a large number that were all kind of lumped together, and so I just chose for this to kind of focus on the 3 highest priority ones. But a lot of the, a number of the ones that I don't remember that the particular one that you mentioned was, was in that group. And so I think it was, so I think I'm the only, committee. Our committee is the only committee who went back and just picked up from where the state reports were in terms of their, for example, risk priority analysis. And part of that was timing. And so maybe it is a question of kind of going back and seeing how much we want to rely on this. But just to say, as it relates to David's comments and Jake's. The thing that the state reports does is that it actually gives very concrete data to a very narrow region of the state. And once you move out of whatever other RCP you might prefer, I think you're going to lose all that, because none of the RCPs, you can't say, well, the RCP is X, and so now it's not 8.5, it's something else. And so now we're going to translate that back down to Westport level. And so we have to make a choice as to whether or not what we're looking at is what is projected to happen in Westport, or that we're back into statewide or Northeast averages. So, and ticks happen to rise to the top of the pile, so that's why I picked ticks.
Bill, these are good questions. The comment I have is what I think you demonstrate that is so important for all of us and all of the committees is relative risk or threat assessment. You said at the outset that you went into this thinking, well, of course, heat is the thing we're most worried about. And as you got into it, you looked and said, well, no, it doesn't look like heat is the most important thing. It looks like disease vectors are the most important thing. Now, the reason I think that's so important is that climate change is this humongous issue that has a million dimensions and that can be seen as overwhelming. And you talked about the mental health issues of kids in schools. If you get overwhelmed by an issue, a couple of things happen. You feel powerless. Well, I can't do anything about it. And you can also start to have mental health issues. And so it's really important for us to identify the most important threats because we can't attack all of them. We have to understand which are the key ones for us to focus on. And so choices have to be made. And so as you look at the issue and say, it may be, that disease vectors, ticks, Lyme disease, are going to have more important impacts on Westport, because of green coverage, we're close to the ocean, than heat. That is really important information for people like Shauna, who have to think about limited resources. What do we do with limited resources? So I think that's very important lesson for all of the committees. Threat assessment and how we make choices, really, really important. The other thing, to get back to Dave, is that when you look at, well, what do you do with the issue of heat, for example? Well, cooling centers and AC, well, that's a good idea. It doesn't really matter what the RCP is. You want to give elderly people some air conditioning. Does it really matter what the RCP is if you've got a program to give people air conditioning? Listen to the news, every month is the warmest month it's ever been in history. I mean, that's just, we need to get people ways to cool off. Let's not spend a lot of time arguing about what the RCP is. We all know it's getting hotter and harder every month. And so when you get to the programmatic, what's the way to deal with this? Those kind of arguments kind of fade into the background for the practical arguments about how do you help people. So anyway, I think this is a really good example. And to get to the next task, of the Jeff's committee is here's a format of PowerPoint slides, bullet issues. And the next presentation we're going to have Joseph Inglesby is 28-page paper, a lot of text. How do we start to put this together into something that looks like one report from one committee? So I don't see any other questions. So let's go, Joseph. Great report. Everyone was sent that, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 days ago. I hope people took an opportunity to read it because there's an awful lot of meat in there. We do have beef cattle in the Ag Committee, so we should enjoy the beef. Joseph, you're on. No, you're on mute though, Joseph. Still on mute.
Okay, sorry.
There he is.
Here I am. The Agricultural Committee defined agriculture in a very broad way. We looked not only at agriculture as crops, but we also looked at forestry. We expanded it to shell fishing, aquaculture, and fishing. And we're looking at the impacts and adaptation of climate change in a changing world. And to do this, we developed a set of risk drivers, which are global warming phenomena risk drivers. And the risk drivers for agriculture and fisheries included the localized climate change, which broke down into temperature and precipitation as being the most important. Then we looked at number 2 was the increased storm severity and frequency. 3 was sea level rise. 4, warming oceans. 5, ocean acidification. And then changes to the Gulf Stream was number 6. And then locally, we looked at drought, flooding, soil erosion, crop failures, landscapes, livestock stress, pollinator decline, disease and pest vectors, food insecurity, zonal forest changes, invasive species, and aquatic species decline and migration. Now, we developed a report over a series of iterations, and that was presented at the Westport Grange recently as a PowerPoint presentation, which I believe the town had filmed. And so you have access to that as well. I believe it's on YouTube. I unfortunately am not presenting the report to you tonight. That took about 45 minutes or so to present. Now, what do you do about all of this? We developed 8 key strategies for agriculture. We focused on the soil health, to manage water resources and risks, to utilize integrated pest management, diversify farm enterprises, which means species, crop varieties, and breeds. And so we looked at livestock stress from extreme temperatures. We engaged in farm planning and adaptive management, public education, and individual and community agriculture. Now you can break that down from the meeting that we had at the Westport Grange. People raised a number of interesting issues and made some interesting comments. One was being that perhaps education is sort of critical to presenting and promoting climate change to the public. And one way of doing that is to take a look at the stresses on agriculture and the local farmers, adaptation to that, and what the local people can do. So we looked at the idea of an expanded program of planting that's similar to what was used in World War II, because in Massachusetts, unfortunately, only 5% of the food that is consumed is actually grown or raised in Massachusetts, and would like to see that raised up to 30% in the state. Whereas during World War II, with the Victory Garden movement, it was up to 40% nationally. So I think it's important with climate change, or we agree that it's important with climate change, impacts to both the economics of agriculture as well as the uh, impacts to agriculture through drought and flooding and industrialized agriculture, that you have to bring agriculture back to the local community. And since Westport is a right to farm community, it sort of makes sense to try and do that locally. So one way of doing that is to interest the public, and I believe that the food pantry is doing that, about to do that, at the former so-called Poor Farm on Drift Road, which is a trustees of reservation property, where they want to develop agriculture for food insecurity. And so that's one aspect, one possibility. And there are other options that you can see, or other victory gardens that are forming or being proposed for New Bedford, for Fall River, for Dartmouth, and so on. So that is a possibility, I think, one of the pluses for agriculture on what could be done. Another aspect that came up at the meeting was we really have to improve soil health for agriculture. You know, in the Midwest, in the sort of the farm heart of the farming, agricultural farming or industrial farming for this country, soil is unfortunately being damaged by erosion and not cover cropping, and it's just more and more fertilizers. So they talked about trying to bring about cover crops that would help to maintain the soil as well as hold the soil with the increased flooding and rainfall that we are having. I believe that we had 5 to 7 inches of rain just in the past 2 days here, according to the weather reports that I hear. So that sort of impact washes away bare soil. So the idea is to have cover crops. And mention was made at the meeting that the local watershed is developing a program to have, I guess, to either give away seed for cover crops. But that's there hasn't been a follow-up with me as yet on that, so it's not included in the report. We also looked at the key strategies for forestry because it's important to maintain the windbreaks and the forested wildlands and farms, and so to protect the old growth forests. So that's being done through some of the conservation programs, as well as the trusts who are purchasing and maintaining these fields. But also education is critical. And what was pointed out in some of the GIS staffing that I reviewed was that you have a lot of independent owners for sort of critical forest land. And if you wanted to create like a bioreserve or areas that are going to be retaining and helping with climate change impacts, you may want to try and coordinate with these people to protect these lands, which are really undevelopable. But to actually link them all together, you can get a non-fragmented open space network, which would be, I think, important. And you could tie that in as well with some of the drainage corridors that we have in town. It would protect the fisheries, for example, the Salters trout, which gets into the shellfish and fisheries aspect. So on the shellfish and fisheries, we looked at restoring shellfish habitat, restoring, reseeding, expanding the bay scallop, quahog, and oyster beds, then using the oysters for reef building and to mitigate storm damage. For anadromous fish, which are those fish that live their lives in the ocean but return to their natal freshwater streams and ponds to spawn, we're reviewing the dam closures impacts and anadromous fish runs, retrofitting the dams with fish ladders or improve the dams to accommodate fish runs and upstream spawning. and then create a non-fragmented open space network of wildlands surrounding the vulnerable fish migration routes. And this is quite important because they're, for example, the Salters trout are temperature sensitive. So over a certain degree, temperature within their streams will either send them back out into the ocean, which is why they're called salters, or will kill them. So you have to shade those migration routes, which is and these natal streams to protect them. And so I think that if you were to look at planning as long-term planning strategy for both climate change, not only for humans, but with biodiversity, which you really want to maintain and enhance, you would want to develop an open space network that's going to be non-fragmented. And I think the town is beginning to work on that. And then if also with the shellfish and fisheries, I don't know if the Board of Health considered, but we're having some real issues these days with septic and sewerage overflow from the combined sewage treatment plants in, say, New Bedford, but also some of the septic systems in Westport, for example, that are impacting the shellfish beds and causing closures. Now, this happened at the West Branch of the Westport River not that long ago, and it turned out that the Land Trust, who's been very, very helpful in with this report, developed a strategy of creating a sort of a biological way of treating the manures, et cetera, coming off of this sloped property, and actually help to improve and solve, to my knowledge, the impact of nitrogen flow and pollutants into the West Branch of the river. And so the beds were reopened. I believe the shellfish beds were reopened after that work was done. The water was much cleaner than it had been before. So those sorts of biological strategies, I think, can be used for the fisheries. Now, with the pelagic fish, what's interesting and tragic is that the Gulf of Maine is currently has the fastest body warming of water in the world today. Now that seems sort of impossible, but it's actually a part of the reports that I've been reading. And there's a real sea surface anomaly that's happening in the Gulf of Maine in comparison to the global average. And that's also combined with the sea surface temperature, where they're having a series of what you'd call them, I suppose, warm spells, where there is a real increase that's been showing between 1981 and 2013 and beyond. It just keeps on, the temperatures keep on going up and up and up and up. And I have there's an increase of sea surface temperature by 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit between 2004 and 2013. And that's causing a migration of cold water fish from our waters northward, seeking cooler temperatures and bringing in a range of other species. So the striped bass may be replaced by the black sea bass. And you have a whole listing of species that are changing. So what do you do about all of this? There's going to have to be an adaptation to the change by the fishermen, for example, to adapt to the non-native fish species, or they have to travel northward to follow the fish. Another issue is overfishing, and you find that there are a lot of factory fishing operations that are taking out perhaps they're actually able to use spotter planes and to see migrating schools of, say, menhaden. Well, with the menhaden are the herring and other fish that sort of swim within the schools. So the spotter planes locate these massive schools of fish. What they do is they then tell the mothership where they are. The mothership then sends out other boats to encircle them, and they vacuum them up. So that's another impact to the anadromous fish population, as well as to the pelagic fish operation. There are changes that are taking place, and you can sort of review that in detail if you want to look at the report. Now here, what we've done is there's already been a change of temperature here. We're now in a different climate, a different temperature zone than we had been, because the temperature as of 2023 is up by 2.5 degrees over the warmer than the 2012 mapping, the contiguous United States. So right now, Westport is designated as zone 7A, which is 0 to 5 degrees Fahrenheit at the average annual extreme minimum temperature for 2023. So I've tried to be fairly thorough, and I've tried to get the best data I could in terms of everything from the farming statistics of how many acres of the field crops, the truck crops, the orchards, pastures, and so on. Productive forestry, productive woodlands, so on. Looked at open space, farmland soils, which I think the planning will be very helpful to the planning board and others to plan the future. And that was all outlined and mapped within the report. We have key messages on temperature, precipitation, sea level rise. And one thing that I've noticed, and also we looked at the climate smart farming for the Northeast, 8 key strategies. So I sort of briefly outlined for you. But part of it, and one of the issues in Westport, is a complete lack of communication between various boards, committees. And so one of the issues is that you find people sort of working in similar tracks, but they don't know what the other's doing. So what I've tried to do is to reach out, which I did. I sent out surveys, and even at this meeting that we had at the Grange, tried to make connections to get additional data, find out what the concerns are, and so on. But there's sort of a lack of communication here, and I'm not certain why, but there are exceptions to that. But I think that it has to be worked on if this is to be successful and not just an academic exercise. So what do you suggest?
Joseph, I think, thank you for that summary. And if people have not read Joseph's report, I really encourage you to do it. I think it is a model for other reports, and there is a lot of information in there. I would add just a couple of things. One, the meeting at the Grange had, I think, about 30 folks there. From our own committee, we had Ray Raposa, Ray Elias, and other members of the Ag subcommittee. There were representatives of CMAP. There were representatives of the Little Compton Farm Coast group. So there was real expansion into the region of other farming interests. And so it was a very good way to explain to other folks in the farming community what we're doing in Westport. and what was in this report. And you know, Joseph went through in a detailed way. As he said, it took 45 minutes. What's in the report, so we could start to kind of begin the feedback process. So I congratulate you on that, Joseph. One quick thing on the fishing part of that, from my experience, Joseph, I would delete the part on the Gulf of Maine. We are a different ecosystem than the Gulf of Maine. Cape Cod serves as a barrier between two ecosystems. So you get the Gulf of Maine with the southern boundary being Cape Cod and the northern boundary being Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, and that's a kind of body of water influenced by the Labrador Current, and you get south of Cape Cod influenced by the Gulf Stream. It's really two very different ecosystems. So I think that discussions of what takes place in the Gulf of Maine aren't really germane to southern New England waters. They're very, very different fisheries. So I think that it would be shorter, and it really is it's a different place ecologically. So Jeff, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, John, thanks, Joseph, again, for your report. And I'd hoped to be at that meeting, but I was unfortunately out of town. I want to stay in touch on future events like that. Just thinking about boundaries of these reports again, I think one thing that we could probably touch on a little bit in your report without a lot of work is the health benefits of a diet that's high in local fresh produce and seafood. I think that's well recognized. And if climatic change is going to impact the ability of people locally to have access to those types of foods, that you know, their health through their diet could be impacted. You know, it's not probably a major point of emphasis, but it's something that we could also add in.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Phil, you got your hand up.
Yeah, just to say, I thought it was an extremely educational report for me on all the baseline information that you had. I thought, you know, that was really great. You know, kind of following up on Jeff's comment, I was struck with this somewhat dystopian idea that, you know, we should plan for self-sufficiency for food in Westport, you know, because you don't know what will happen with supply chains. And as you look out, you know, into the future, you know, we have the potential, you know, the risk, but also the potential to be, you know, feeding ourselves a lot more. So I think planning for that is great. Two things. One is that you mentioned the precipitation numbers. And again, I think it gets to the question of, you know, do we want to use the numbers in the state reports, which are, you know, which are more localized. And the other thing is the number, and you touched on, you know, a number of this, which is the kind of what are we doing now piece of it. I was going to bring up, you know, the Land Trust Watershed Alliance program to deal with soil or to help, you know, conserve soil. There are two other things that related, that are agriculturally related. One is a report that came out, and I can give you the details, but there was this project by the Massachusetts Association of Conservation Districts, which organized a program among 6 Westport farmers to do manure management. And through that program, which went for a couple of years, the report just came out in 2022, they reduced an enormous amount of nitrogen going into the river. And the significance of nitrogen in the river is that it interferes with eelgrass. And eelgrass is essential for shellfish. And so and we've seen the fact that when nitrogen went down to the acceptable water quality level that the state has established, 300 acres of eelgrass have propagated in the West Branch, and so there's this direct link between and farmers have a significant, through their activities, have a significant impact on nitrogen in the river, even more than septic systems. So there's an aspect of that. And then the last thing is that the Department of Conservation and Recreation came before the Conservation Commission, and they're piloting a planting eelgrass at a test site off of East Beach to see whether or not they can, expand the restoration of eelgrass, which happens big time, down in in the Chesapeake Bay area. They have an enormous program, and you can get a lot of people involved in eelgrass restoration. But to me, it just goes back to the idea of being part of each of the reports, talking about positive stories that are going on and how they can be built on.
I think that's critically important, because these positive stories are actually talking about the visioning for the future, and that's something that can engages people's imagination and involvement. So I think that these are stories that we should tell and should be in the report. And maybe I could get more information about these reports and the outcomes, and that could be added to this as a plus.
I can send you,
as a positive.
I can send you the Conservation Commission report, because I have that electronically, and I have the presentation that DCR made to the Conservation Commission on their restoration. So I'll get that into your hands.
Thank you.
Joseph, I have a couple of other comments. I think Phil's comments were really good. And I think that Phil, on the precipitation numbers, this is going to be, again, one of the things that Jeff's committee looks at, is how do we make sure we use consistent numbers in terms of precipitation, temperature rise, and everything else from one chapter to the next. So again, it's a coherent report. But I think that one of the things that Joseph has done that I think is a good model for all of the committee reports is that there are a lot of references to people in Westport. He's interviewed a lot of people in Westport for information. And I think maybe it was in the presentation you gave at the Grange. I remember it more in that presentation, Joseph, than in what's before this committee. There were lots of illustrations of people in Westport doing the kinds of things that you're advocating be done, cover crops and other things, local farmers. And so the more that we show, either by illustrations of photographs or by the way you reference, that you talk to the port person, the more that we have people of Westport referenced in the report, the more this becomes the Westport Climate Resilience Committee report, because it's got citizens of Westport in it. And they are doing what we're suggesting be done. And the report you had at the Grange was filled with stories of people doing things like that. And I think that is a really good model for all the reports. We are recommending that people do what's already being done, because that means it must be possible to do it. These people are already doing it. So I think have really shown you can do that in the report. And I just think that's a great model of a way to relate to more and more people in Westport. Hey, we're not asking the impossible. This is already being done. Just go down the street, talk to your neighbor. And the last point I'd make is that some of the recommendations, no tillage, things like that, are going to be difficult. It's not the way we've done things. It's more expensive. And so we're going to have a part of that recommendation of we're going to have to find ways that help you as a farmer make this worth your while. Whether it's going to the legislature or whether it's some other way that's going to help you do this, because if it made financial sense for you to do it, you'd be doing it. And so as you translate these into recommendations, we're going to have to realize what's the resistance now to it and how do we overcome that resistance. But anyway, I think that's a great report. I urge, if you haven't read it, please read it. And thank you, Joseph, and your team.
Well, John,
Yeah.
before we sign off on that, the reason that the Gulf of Maine was included is that a lot of the fishermen are not staying local. The actual commercial fishermen are traveling out into the Gulf of Maine waters, you see, for the fisheries, and also the both the fish and the lobsters are migrating with them. So you've got sort of a transferal from local waters further and further.
Okay,
north.
fair enough. I know they fish, the offshore lobstermen are going east because lobsters need colder waters, and you can't find any lobsters south of the Cape. So if you want to talk about how far they have to go to chase lobsters, okay. Constance, you got a question or a comment?
Yes, I was just wondering about the process here. Since we're getting close to getting a final report together, will we be able to see the final report, read through it, and make recommendations, questions before it goes to the Board of Selectmen?
Oh, yeah. So that's a good question to kind of where we go from here. We're going to have a July meeting. I want to get that date. And at the July meeting, we're going to get the first draft of the infrastructure. Is that correct, Bob Daler? Is Bob still with us?
I'm with you. Yes.
Yeah. So we'll get your first draft report, correct? And then we may get historic structures, and that'll be, Constance. We will have seen, you're on Mike Sullivan's committee. They were the first committee to do the draft report. So we will have had all of the reports give us their first drafts by July. And then it's a question of knitting them all together so they look like a coherent whole. And that's going to take some time. And I think it's going to take work by the planning staff and Jeff Canton's committee as to what does this look like? How much text, how much pictures, what format? And then it's going to take some discussion between Jeff's committee and also the whole committee, Constance, about how do we want to present this, you know, what do we think of it, first of all? What kind of comments do we have? Feedback on the report as a whole? And then how do we want to engage the community? Do we want to have some public meetings with the community? Go present the whole first draft of the report, get their comments, like Joseph did with Ag at the Grange? Do we want to do that for the whole committee report with some meetings like that? But I think we want to engage with the community before and listen to what they have to say, make any comment changes based on what we hear, and then see if we think after those changes we think it's ready to go to the Board of Selectmen. Does that make sense to you, Constance?
Well, yeah, that is, that's quite a process. Sure. I guess I'm concerned about the tone of the report and what
Yeah.
sort of gets emphasized in terms of a executive summary, because that's really the only thing people will read for the most part. And that will probably get published in the local paper and all of that. And so, yeah, I'm just concerned about that. I know that your unplanned letter to the editor was a mistake, that you didn't expect it to be a letter to the editor or op-ed piece for Shorelines about a month and a half, 2 months ago. But it was, I think it was very alarming in the tone of it, and some of the broad statements that it made. And so I just, I really thought that it would have been a good idea for, you know, I don't know, for there to be some sort of retraction for that letter, because it was just not ready. And I know that you didn't intend on it to be used that way, but it was
That's correct.
Startling to see it and to read it, because I hope that that's not where we're going with an executive summary for this 3-year
Well,
effort
he,
that we've been.
Yeah, no one was more shocked to read that than me. That was like all these reports, a first draft, because there needs to be a preface, and it was a first draft. And like everything else, it's supposed to be, you know, one of these things we put together for the committee to look at. And so I said, well, I got to do my job and get a first draft done too. And then Ted Hayes, somehow got his hands on it, and I can't believe he printed it without even calling me up. I'm just in disbelief that he did that. But, you know, I'm sorry he did it, but he certainly didn't do it with my permission. So at any rate, that's the process. You know, get all the reports together. We take a look at it. We make it look like a coherent whole. We make whatever changes we want to, including to the preface, if people think it's too hard, too soft, too whatever. And then we figure out, how do we go to the public with it? Okay?
Yeah,
Jeff, you're the one that's going to bear a lot of the burden on this. What do you have to say?
Well, I just think, John, for this and other reasons, you know, the way social media takes on a life of its own, I think it's real important that we be in front of things as we start thinking about outreach and engagement. Our subcommittee has had a preliminary outreach and engagement plan in the can, so to speak, for over a year. I think it's probably a good time for us to recirculate that, to get some additional people involved in planning some of that. And I think maybe what I would suggest is that for the July meeting, that we put together a little bit of a presentation on, what a good outreach plan might look like and what we need. And if I think we should also have a another meeting of our subcommittee before then, and I would invite anybody on this call who'd want to join in on that, that they'd be welcome to do so.
Okay, Constance, you've still got your hand up, but I think you still want to talk?
Sorry. No, I'm good.
Okay, Joseph.
Well, I just want to make mention that in past years, when we were developing something that might have been controversial but didn't necessarily have to be, well, this is for the Dartmouth 350, and we went to the Dartmouth Chronicle and we published numbers of essays. There's a whole series of essays that were published with illustrations, and that actually helped to sort of prime the public for sort of thinking about all of this in a very cohesive way. And then we had public meetings as well that were open to the public, and these demonstrations and so on. So you could do something, because that would have helped you a lot, I think, with the sewer and water line debacle here, where the public didn't know what was being proposed, the vision behind it, or how it could be helpful for, say, expanding the tax base, as has been done in Dartmouth and Fairhaven. For an
That's
example.
a good idea. I don't want to get into all the ideas today, but I think that Jeff, we'll put that on the agenda for the July meeting. Before we do the last item on tonight's agenda, while we've still got 12 of us here, the third Thursday of July, we go every other month, would be July 18th. Is that, how many people could not make July 18th? I don't hear any objections to that. Is it okay to set our next meeting for July 18th at 5 o'clock?
Sure.
Okay, so we will set July 18th at 5 as the next meeting. And what we're going to have is Bob Daler is going to give the infrastructure first draft report. I hope Wendy Nicholas will be able to do historic structures. And Jeff, you might be able to tell us what you think would be a way that we can start thinking about presenting this to the public. Does that make sense? With that, I want to get to the third item on the agenda. Michael Burris, you were going to talk to us about hazard mitigation grant.
Yes, we just got the funds for this grant recently. This was a grant that I applied for last year, and the funds were just dispersed this year. So we've contracted with PAR Engineering to develop a hazard mitigation plan. Hazard mitigation plan will identify risks to property and life posed by natural disasters and other events that may occur in Westport, and come up with strategies to mitigate those risks. And it'll be presented in a form of policy recommendations that will be sent to the select board for adoption, and will be sent to FEMA for their acceptance as well. So we, as a part of that, we have to form a committee, and I would like someone from the Climate Resilience Committee to be on that. Ideally from the infrastructure subcommittee, although Bob has jumped off the call. But we will be looking for volunteers to be on that committee. And the committee would probably meet during work days and would be virtual meetings.
So Bob is chair of our infrastructure committee, and he just left the meeting. Do I hear anyone nominating Bob Daler to be the person who would represent us? Phil, are you nominating Bob?
No, I think that's a chairperson's responsibility. to
Oh, you
nominate
are,
another
you are
chair.
a dirty dog.
You can
I'd
also,
I'd like to hear from Bob whether he wants to be on.
I was gonna say, I'm not gonna, I don't want to appoint anyone and get in trouble.
Well, why don't, Michael,
He's
why
almost
don't
a
you,
neighbor, you know.
why don't you and I talk to Bob, and either Bob or I will do it, all right?
yeah, that's fine. As long as the committee is fine with us doing that, you know.
Now, does this hazard mitigation grant affect or assist the work of the CRC in any way?
I would say that it does because it's, you know, it's going to identify hazards like storm surges, hurricanes, and stuff like that. And so as, you know, climate becomes warmer, the impacts of, or the way those, you know, hurricanes and storms will become stronger, storm surges will become more extreme. And so I think it will be relevant to the work of the CRC.
Okay. All right. Well, Bob and I'll figure out with Michael how to get the CRC represented in that work. Any other business to come before the CRC tonight?
I have one last thing.
Oh,
For
yeah.
the next meeting in July, we do need to have reappointments of the leadership. We don't have a quorum here, so I don't think we should do that without a quorum. But in July, we'll have to have chair and vice chair reappointed.
Okay. And we don't have a quorum right now?
No.
Okay. All right. So think about that. And we'll, Michael, you'll make sure that's on the agenda. So everyone knows that's on the agenda when we send the agenda out. So that'll make sure we have a quorum. Good. All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
Is there a second? Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Thank you all
Aye.
very much for your attention today.